The day my mother emptied the family safe was the day we thought she had betrayed us, but the truth would eventually break every heart in the room. That was the sentence I found myself repeating months later, after everything had finally come to light. But at the beginning, none of us saw the truth. All we saw was an empty safe and a secret that seemed impossible to explain. My name is Emily Wilson, and until that spring, I believed I knew everything about my mother. Margaret Wilson was 67 years old, a widow, and the kind of woman who never spent money on herself. She still drove the same sedan she had owned for more than 10 years. She still clipped coupons from the Sunday newspaper. She still kept every birthday card and family photograph in carefully labeled boxes. If there was one thing everyone in our family knew, it was how much she treasured the wedding gold. The collection had been passed down through generations. Some pieces belonged to my grandmother. Others had come from my great-grandmother. My father had added to the collection during their marriage, buying small gold bracelets and necklaces whenever he could afford them. Together, the pieces represented decades of family history. For as long as I could remember, the wedding gold stayed locked inside a large safe hidden in the back of my mother's closet. She treated it almost like a family heirloom museum. On special occasions, she would take out a piece and tell stories about the people who wore it before us. That was why the discovery felt so shocking. It happened 1 week before my daughter Olivia's wedding. The entire family was gathered at my mother's house preparing for the celebration. Decorations covered the dining room table. Fabric samples and flower catalogs were scattered across the kitchen counters. Olivia wanted to wear one of the family gold necklaces during the ceremony, something that had become a tradition among the women in our family. Late that afternoon, my mother asked me to retrieve the necklace from the safe. I remember walking down the hallway smiling, already imagining how beautiful Olivia would look on her wedding day. I opened the closet. Everything appeared normal. I entered the combination and pulled open the heavy metal door. Then I froze. The shelves were empty, completely empty. At first, I thought I was looking in the wrong compartment. I checked every shelf twice, then 3 times. Nothing. No necklaces, no bracelets, no earrings, no gold coins. Nothing remained. My stomach immediately tightened. I called for my mother. She arrived a few moments later, carrying a tray of coffee cups. The moment she looked inside the safe, her expression changed. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. She knew exactly what had happened. "Mom," I asked quietly, "where is everything?" For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she set the tray down and looked away. "It is gone," she replied softly. The answer made no sense. "Gone where?" I asked. Her silence felt heavier than any explanation could have been. Family members began gathering near the doorway. Olivia stepped into the room. My younger brother David arrived a few moments later. Everyone stared at the empty safe. Finally, I asked the question nobody wanted to say aloud. "Did you sell it?" My mother's eyes filled with sadness. She nodded once. The room instantly fell silent. Nobody could believe what they had heard. Decades of family history. Every piece of wedding gold. Sold. And somehow, none of us knew about it. As shock spread across the faces of my children and relatives, my mother remained standing beside the open safe. She looked exhausted, almost as though she had been carrying a burden for a very long time. But when we demanded an explanation, she gave us none. She simply whispered, "I am sorry," and walked slowly out of the room, leaving the rest of us staring at the empty shelves and wondering what kind of secret could possibly be worth giving up everything she once cherished. The rest of that evening felt like a blur. What should have been a joyful week filled with wedding preparations suddenly turned into something else entirely. Conversations stopped whenever my mother entered a room. Relatives exchanged concerned looks. Even Olivia, who had spent months planning every detail of her wedding, seemed distracted. Nobody could understand why my mother would sell something so important without telling anyone. After dinner, several family members gathered in the living room. My brother David paced back and forth near the fireplace, while Olivia sat quietly on the couch, twisting her engagement ring around her finger. I remained at the dining room table, trying to make sense of everything. Eventually, David broke the silence. "This does not make any sense," he said. "Mom protected that gold more carefully than anything else she owned." Nobody disagreed. The wedding gold was more than jewelry. It represented family history, memories, and traditions passed from one generation to the next. For decades, every woman in our family had worn at least one piece during her wedding ceremony. The idea that it was simply gone felt impossible to accept. Later that evening, I found my mother sitting alone on the back porch. The sun had disappeared below the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of the porch light. She stared into the darkness beyond the yard without speaking. I sat beside her and waited. After several minutes, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me since opening the safe. "Why did you do it?" My mother lowered her eyes. "I cannot explain right now." Her answer only deepened my frustration. "Cannot or will not?" I asked. For a moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. Instead, she simply shook her head. "Please trust me." Those 3 words should have comforted me. Instead, they left me feeling even more confused. Trust her? How could I trust something I did not understand? The following morning, the tension inside the house became impossible to ignore. Wedding preparations continued, but the atmosphere felt completely different. Family members whispered in corners. Questions spread faster than answers. Some relatives quietly suggested financial problems. Others wondered whether someone had manipulated my mother into making a terrible decision. A few even speculated that she might have hidden debts none of us knew about. By lunchtime, rumors had replaced facts. Through it all, my mother remained silent. She helped arrange flowers. She folded decorations. She smiled politely whenever guests arrived. Yet behind every smile, I sensed exhaustion. It was as if she were carrying a burden far heavier than the missing gold itself. 2 days later, another surprising detail emerged. While reviewing old family photographs for the wedding slideshow, Olivia noticed something unusual. Several pictures taken within the last 2 years showed my mother wearing almost none of her jewelry. At first, the observation seemed insignificant. Then we realized the timing matched perfectly. The gold had not disappeared recently. It had likely been gone for a long time. That discovery changed everything. If the gold had been sold years earlier, then my mother had been keeping this secret far longer than any of us imagined. That evening, I confronted her again. "How long ago did you sell it?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Almost 2 years." The room fell silent. 2 years. For 24 months, she had hidden this from her children, her grandchildren, and every member of the family. David looked stunned. Olivia began quietly crying. My mother watched us with heartbreaking sadness, but still refused to explain why. Then she said something that stayed with me long afterward. "One day you will understand," she whispered. "And when that day comes, I hope you can forgive me." Before anyone could respond, she stood and left the room. We listened as her footsteps slowly disappeared down the hallway. None of us understood what she meant. At that moment, all we knew was that the woman we loved most was hiding something enormous from us. And for the first time in my life, I began wondering whether I truly knew my own mother at all. The wedding arrived, but the excitement that should have filled our family felt strangely muted. Guests smiled, music played, and the ceremony itself was beautiful, yet beneath the celebration lingered a question nobody could forget. What had happened to the gold, and why would my mother refuse to explain it? Throughout the day, I watched her carefully. Margaret moved through the crowd greeting relatives, posing for photographs, and helping wherever she could. To everyone else, she looked calm. To me, she looked tired. There were moments when I caught her staring into the distance with an expression I had never seen before. It was not guilt. It was sadness. Deep sadness. After the wedding reception ended, family members gathered at a nearby hotel for the night. Conversations eventually drifted back to the same subject. Some relatives were sympathetic toward my mother. Others were not. One aunt quietly suggested that perhaps age had affected her judgment. Another relative wondered whether she had been manipulated by someone outside the family. Each theory seemed worse than the last. The hardest part was that my mother never defended herself. She allowed people to speculate. She allowed people to misunderstand. She simply remained silent. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal, but the tension remained. Phone calls became less frequent. Family dinners felt awkward. Even David, who had always been closest to our mother, seemed distant. One afternoon, I stopped by her house unexpectedly. The home looked exactly as it always had. Fresh flowers sat on the kitchen table. Family photographs lined the hallway. Yet something felt different. The warmth that once filled every room seemed diminished. My mother was sitting alone in the living room, sorting old photographs. When she saw me, she smiled warmly, but I could immediately tell she had been crying earlier. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted answers. Instead, we spent nearly an hour looking through family pictures together. She told stories about my father, about our childhood, and about relatives who had passed away years earlier. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Then I noticed something unusual. Mixed among the photographs was an envelope. It looked old and worn. The moment my mother realized I had seen it, she quickly slid it beneath a stack of albums. The movement was subtle, but impossible to miss. My curiosity immediately returned. "What is that?" I asked. She hesitated. "Nothing important." The answer felt rehearsed. For the rest of the visit, I could not stop thinking about the envelope. Later that evening, I called David. To my surprise, he admitted he had noticed other strange things as well. Over the past year, our mother had occasionally disappeared for entire afternoons without explanation. She received mail from places neither of us recognized. Several times, she seemed worried about money, yet her bank accounts appeared stable. The more we talked, the more questions emerged. None of the pieces fit together, yet somehow, they felt connected. A few days later, another event deepened the mystery. While helping my mother organize paperwork for a property tax renewal, I accidentally came across an old bank statement. One line immediately caught my attention. Nearly 2 years earlier, a large deposit had been made into her account. The amount was significant. Significant enough to match what the wedding gold might have been worth. My pulse quickened. Finally, I had found proof that the sale actually happened. But what happened after the money arrived? I searched the remaining pages. Within months, nearly all of it was gone. Withdrawn, transferred, spent. There was almost nothing left. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. If the money was gone, then where had it gone? That question followed me all the way home. For the first time, I realized this mystery was much bigger than missing jewelry. Somewhere behind those transactions was a story my mother was desperately trying to keep hidden. And despite everything that had happened between us, I knew I could not stop until I discovered the truth. Once I saw the bank statement, I could not stop thinking about it. For nearly 2 years, my mother had carried a secret that seemed to grow larger every time I uncovered another piece of information. The sale of the gold was no longer a theory. The bank records confirmed it. A large deposit had entered her account shortly after the jewelry disappeared. What troubled me even more was what happened afterward. The money had vanished almost as quickly as it arrived. The following week, I decided to look deeper. At first, I felt guilty. Margaret was my mother, not a suspect in a criminal investigation. Yet every attempt to ask her directly ended the same way. She would smile sadly, ask me to trust her, and change the subject. If she would not explain the truth, I felt I had no choice but to find it myself. One afternoon, while helping her organize paperwork in preparation for renewing her homeowner insurance policy, I noticed several file boxes stacked neatly in the corner of her spare bedroom. My mother had always been meticulous about records. Every receipt, tax return, and utility bill seemed to have its own folder. As I sorted documents, one particular file caught my attention. The label simply read personal records. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me felt I was crossing a line. Another part of me believed the answers might finally be inside. The folder contained ordinary documents at first. Medical records, insurance forms, bank correspondence. Then I discovered something unexpected. Several withdrawal receipts matched the dates shown on the account statement. Each receipt represented a substantial amount of money. Yet the descriptions attached to the transactions were frustratingly vague. There were no obvious explanations. No notes. No detailed records. Just amounts and dates. I copied the information into a notebook and continued searching. The more documents I reviewed, the stranger the pattern became. The money had not been spent all at once. It disappeared gradually over nearly 18 months. Some payments were made electronically. Others were cashier's checks. A few were direct transfers to organizations I did not recognize. By the time I finished reviewing the records, my confusion had only increased. That evening, I shared everything with my brother David. We met at a small diner near his office and spread copies of the transactions across our table. He studied them carefully before shaking his head. "This does not look like someone buying luxury items," he said. He was right. There were no expensive vacations, no new vehicles, no major home renovations. Whatever the money had been used for, it was not for personal comfort. That realization created an entirely new mystery. If our mother had not spent the money on herself, then where had it gone? Over the next several days, David and I began tracing some of the organizations listed on the documents. Most were ordinary institutions, hospitals, legal, offices, financial service providers. Nothing immediately stood out. Then we noticed something unusual. Several payments had been sent repeatedly to the same medical facility located nearly 200 miles away. Neither of us recognized the name. More importantly, nobody in our immediate family had ever mentioned receiving treatment there. The discovery left us stunned. Why would our mother be sending large amounts of money to a medical facility none of us had heard of? The question followed me everywhere. Late one evening, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table reviewing copies of the records again. That was when I remembered the envelope I had seen hidden among the photographs. The old envelope she had quickly tucked away. The memory refused to leave my mind. Something about it felt important. The next morning, I visited her house again. My mother was in the backyard tending flowers when I arrived. While she worked outside, I found myself glancing toward the living room where the photo albums remained stacked beside her chair. The envelope was nowhere in sight. Yet for some reason, I felt certain it contained a piece of the puzzle I was missing. As I prepared to leave, my mother walked me to the front door. Before I stepped outside, she gently touched my arm. "Emily," she said softly, "sometimes the truth hurts more before it heals." The words caught me completely off guard. Before I could respond, she smiled and closed the door. Standing alone on the porch, I realized something important. My mother was not hiding because she was afraid of being exposed. She was hiding because she was protecting something. And for the first time since this mystery began, I started wondering whether we had been asking the wrong questions all along. For the next several weeks, David and I continued following the trail left behind by the missing money. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. The payments connected to the distant medical facility remained the most puzzling discovery so far. Neither of us could understand why our mother would send so much money there, especially when nobody in the family appeared to have received treatment at that location. One afternoon, David managed to obtain publicly available information about the facility. It was not a standard hospital. It specialized in long-term care and advanced medical treatment for patients facing serious health conditions. The information immediately caught our attention. We reviewed the payment dates again. The transfers had occurred regularly for nearly 18 months. Some were small, others were substantial. Together, they represented a significant portion of the money generated by selling the wedding gold. Could Mom have been helping someone? David asked. The possibility had never crossed my mind. Until then, we had focused entirely on our family. What if the money had been spent on someone outside the immediate household? That evening, I visited my mother once again. She was sitting at the kitchen table reading a book when I arrived. Her expression brightened when she saw me, but I noticed the familiar sadness behind her smile. We talked casually for nearly an hour before I finally mentioned the medical facility. The reaction was immediate. Her hands froze. The color drained slightly from her face. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough. For the first time since this mystery began, I knew I had touched something important. "Mom," I said gently, "who was being treated there?" She looked away. Several long seconds passed. Then she quietly closed the book. "Emily, please stop digging." The answer stunned me. Until then, she had never directly asked me to stop. "Why?" I asked. "Because some stories belong to the people who live them." Her words only deepened my determination. When I left her house that evening, I felt closer to the truth than ever before. The following weekend brought another unexpected development. Olivia stopped by my home carrying several boxes she had borrowed from her grandmother months earlier while planning the wedding. Most contained old photographs and decorations. As we sorted through them, she suddenly called my name. Hidden beneath a stack of photo albums sat a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of receipts, appointment reminders, and handwritten notes. None of us had seen them before. My pulse quickened as I began examining the contents. The dates matched the same period when the gold had been sold. Several receipts referenced travel expenses. Others referenced hotel stays near the medical facility. Then I discovered something even more surprising. Many of the documents contained the initials JW. I immediately recognized them. James Wilson, my father. For several seconds, I simply stared at the papers. My father had passed away almost 6 years earlier. Why would documents from 2 years ago still carry his initials? Olivia looked just as confused. We continued sorting through the box. Near the bottom, I found a folded piece of paper covered in my mother's handwriting. It was not a letter. It appeared to be a personal reminder list. Most of the entries were simple tasks. Pick up medication. Call specialist. Mail payment. Then one line caught my attention. Do not tell the children until everything is finished. My heart began pounding. Finished? Finished what? The note raised more questions than answers. Yet for the first time, the mystery no longer felt random. The medical facility, the travel records, the hidden payments, the note. Somehow they were all connected. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone reviewing every document again. The pieces still did not fit together completely, but a pattern was emerging. My mother had not sold the gold impulsively. She had not spent the money carelessly. Every payment appeared deliberate. Every action appeared planned. Whatever secret she was protecting had consumed nearly 2 years of her life. And deep down, I could not shake the growing feeling that the truth was going to be far more heartbreaking than any of us had imagined. The discoveries from the wooden box changed everything. For the first time, I felt as though I was standing at the edge of a truth that had remained hidden for years. Yet the closer I came, the more painful the mystery seemed to become. Over the next several days, I reviewed every receipt, every note, and every appointment reminder. One detail continued appearing again and again. Travel dates, hotel stays, medical consultations, all connected to the same period after the wedding gold had been sold. David joined me one evening as we spread the documents across my dining room table. Hours passed as we organized them chronologically. Slowly, a timeline emerged. My mother had made dozens of trips to the medical facility over nearly 2 years. The pattern was impossible to ignore. She had devoted enormous amounts of time, energy, and money to something she never mentioned to her family. What if she was helping someone we do not know about? David asked again. This time, the question felt more realistic than ever. The next clue appeared unexpectedly. While sorting through the appointment reminders, I noticed one envelope that had never been opened. It had slipped between several folded papers. The envelope was addressed to my mother and had been mailed about 18 months earlier. Inside was a short letter from a social worker connected to the same medical facility. My hands trembled as I read it. The letter thanked my mother for her continued support and dedication during an extremely difficult situation. Most of the details were confidential and had been blacked out for privacy reasons in the copy she kept. However, one sentence remained visible. Your commitment has given this family hope when they had nowhere else to turn. I read the lines several times. This was no longer about luxury purchases or hidden spending. My mother had clearly been helping someone. But who? And why had she sacrificed so much without telling her own children? The following weekend, I visited her house again. Answer, but it was the first honest response she had given me. My heart ached as I looked at her. She seemed older than I remembered, tired, fragile. Yet there was also a sense of peace in her expression, as though she believed she had done the right thing regardless of the consequences. Before I left, she handed me a small key. The gesture surprised me so much that I could barely speak. You will need this eventually, she said. When the time comes, you will understand everything. Dozens of carefully organized folders, journals, photographs, and sealed envelopes. Resting on top was a handwritten note addressed to David and me. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first sentence immediately brought tears to my eyes. If you are reading this, then the secret I protected can finally be shared. I continued reading while my mother sat quietly nearby. The letter explained everything. Nearly 2 years earlier, my daughter Olivia had unknowingly faced a devastating financial crisis. Shortly after becoming engaged, her fiancé's family business collapsed under unexpected debt. The young couple suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by obligations they could not manage alone. They were too proud and too frightened to tell anyone. As the situation worsened, they quietly considered postponing their future plans and abandoning dreams they had spent years building. My mother discovered the truth by accident during a private conversation with Olivia. She learned that the stress was affecting every part of their lives. What shocked me most was what happened next. Rather than tell the rest of the family, Margaret decided to help herself. The wedding gold represented the most valuable asset she personally controlled. Selling it would provide enough money to eliminate the crushing financial burden and give the young couple a chance to start their lives without fear. But the story did not end there. Hidden among the documents were records showing additional payments made to the medical facility. Those records revealed another truth we never expected. During the same period, the mother of Olivia's fiancé had been battling a serious illness. Insurance covered only part of the treatment costs. The family was rapidly exhausting every resource they had. My mother secretly used much of the remaining money to help pay for life-saving care. The social worker's letter suddenly made perfect sense. So did the travel records. Margaret had personally visited the family, delivered support, coordinated assistance, and ensured treatment continued without interruption. She had done all of it anonymously. Tears streamed down my face as I read page after page. The woman we had, accused of selfishness, had sacrificed the most treasured possessions she owned to protect two families at the same time. The final document inside the chest was a journal. In one entry she wrote, "The children may be angry when they discover the gold is gone, but I can live with that. I could not live with watching them suffer when I had the ability to help." I looked toward my mother. She was crying quietly now, not because her secret had been exposed, but because the burden of carrying it alone was finally ending. In that moment, every accusation, every suspicion, and every hurtful thought I had carried for months collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. The mystery was over. The sacrifice was real. And for the first time, I truly understood the depth of my mother's love. For a long time after leaving the attic, I could not find the words to express what I was feeling. David arrived later that afternoon, and together we sat with our mother at the kitchen table while the documents from the wooden chest rested between us. One by one, we showed him the letters, receipts, journal entries, and records that had finally revealed the truth. As he read each page, his expression slowly changed from confusion to disbelief, and then to heartbreak. Several times he removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. The silence in the room felt heavier than any conversation we could have had. We had spent months questioning our mother, doubting her decisions, and wondering why she would destroy a tradition that had survived for generations. Now we were forced to face a far more painful reality. She had sacrificed something precious so that others could keep their futures intact. That evening, Olivia came to the house. I had called her earlier and asked her to come alone because there was something important she needed to know. When she arrived, she immediately sensed the seriousness in the room. My mother invited her to sit beside her at the table. Then, without speaking, Margaret handed her the journal. For nearly an hour, Olivia read page after page. Tears began forming before she reached the halfway point. By the time she finished, she could barely speak. The realization hit her, harder than anyone else. She had known about the financial crisis. She had known about the fear and uncertainty she and her fiancé experienced. What she had never known was how much my mother had given up to protect them. "Why did you not tell me?" Olivia finally whispered. Margaret reached across the table and gently held her hand. "Because I never wanted you to feel responsible," she said softly. "You deserve to begin your future with hope, not guilt." Olivia broke down crying. She leaned forward and embraced her grandmother as tightly as she could. Watching them together, I felt my own heart breaking. For months we had focused on the missing gold. We never stopped to consider what our mother had gained by letting it go. She had protected a young couple's future. She had helped a struggling family survive a medical crisis. She had carried the entire burden alone simply because she believed it was the right thing to do. Over the following days, the truth spread through the family. Relatives who had criticized her called to apologize. Some cried openly during phone conversations. Others admitted they had judged her unfairly. Every person who learned the full story reacted the same way. Shock first, then sadness, then gratitude. Yet through all of it, my mother remained humble. She never acted like a hero. She never sought praise. Whenever someone thanked her, she simply smiled and changed the subject. A week later, while helping her organize the attic documents again, I discovered one final sealed envelope hidden beneath the journal. The envelope was addressed to the entire family. My mother looked surprised when I found it. For a moment, she considered taking it back. Then she quietly shook her head. "No," she said. "You should read it." Inside was a letter written shortly after she sold the gold. As I read the opening lines, tears immediately filled my eyes. It was not a letter explaining her decision. It was a letter explaining her silence. Every sentence revealed the same truth. She had never been afraid of losing the jewelry. She had only been afraid that the people she loved would carry unnecessary pain. By the time I finished reading, I knew that this letter would eventually need to be shared with everyone. Because hidden within those pages was the final piece of the story, and once our family heard those words, nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days later, our entire family gathered at my mother's house for a Sunday dinner. The atmosphere felt completely different from the tension that had filled the same rooms months earlier. This time, everyone came with a deeper understanding of what had happened and with a desire to make things right. Before the meal began, Margaret stood slowly from her chair and held the final letter in her hands. The room immediately became quiet. Children stopped talking. Conversations faded. Every eye turned toward her. For a moment, she simply looked around the room at the faces of her children, grandchildren, relatives, and friends. Then she handed the letter to me. "Please read it," she said softly. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. The letter began with words none of us would ever forget. "If you are hearing this, then the truth has finally reached the people I love most." As I continued reading, tears appeared throughout the room. My mother explained that every piece of gold she sold had once represented love, sacrifice, and family. She wrote that selling it had been painful, but watching the people she loved suffer would have been far more painful. She explained that she never viewed the jewelry as treasure. To her, the true treasure was the family itself. The letter described countless nights she spent praying for guidance after discovering the financial crisis facing Olivia and her fiancé. It described her heartbreak when she learned about the medical struggles affecting another family connected to those she loved. Most importantly, it revealed why she remained silent. I knew that if I explained my decision, you would try to stop me. You would insist on sharing the burden. But some burdens are easier to carry when carried quietly. Several family members openly cried as the words filled the room. Even David, who rarely showed emotion, sat with tears running down his face. When I reached the final page, my voice nearly failed me. The closing paragraph was simple. "Please do not remember the missing gold. Remember the lives it helped protect. Remember the futures it helped preserve. And most of all, remember that love is most powerful when it asks for nothing in return." When I finished reading, the room remained silent for several long moments. Then Olivia stood up. Through tears, she walked across the room and knelt beside her grandmother. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should have trusted you." Margaret gently touched her face and smiled. "There is nothing to forgive," she replied. One by one, family members approached her. Some apologized. Some hugged her. Others simply sat beside her and cried. It was one of the most emotional moments I have ever witnessed. The months of suspicion, confusion, and hurt slowly disappeared beneath a wave of understanding and gratitude. Later that evening, as the sun began setting outside, we gathered for a family photograph in the backyard. 3 generations stood together beneath the same oak tree where countless family pictures had been taken over the years. As the camera clicked, I looked at my mother standing in the center of the group. She no longer seemed burdened by secrets. She seemed peaceful, free. For the first time since opening the empty safe, I understood what she had been trying to teach us all along. The value of the gold had never been measured in dollars. Its true value was revealed only after it was gone. It became hope for a young couple. It became support for a struggling family. It became a lesson none of us would ever forget. Years later, people still talk about the missing wedding gold, but they do not tell the story as one of loss. They tell it as the story of a mother whose love was so great that she willingly gave away her most treasured possessions to protect others. And every time the story is told, the ending remains the same. There are always tears, not because of what was lost, but because of what one extraordinary mother chose to give.